Welcome to Navigating India. In the long history of post independence India, the woman voter was invisible, rarely spoken about, and almost never listened to. But today, something has fundamentally changed. Women are voting in greater numbers than ever before, making independent choices of their own and holding politicians accountable. In a recent book, What Women Want Understanding the Female Voter in Modern India, journalist Ruhi Tewari traces the emergence of this Mahila voter, drawing on 2 decades of travel across India to understand how women vote and why. Let us hear more about this from her. Ruhi Tewari, thank you so much for joining us today. The protagonist of your book is the Mahila voter, the female voter. You began studying elections in 2008, and by 2014, you found that something has changed fundamentally. Back in 2008, it was difficult to find women who would speak openly about their political choices. But by 2014, Mahila voters were actively sharing their political preferences, especially female students leading the way. So, what has changed? What is the story behind this shift?
Thank you for having me on your podcast. So, as I've mentioned in the book, I first covered an election in the winter of 2008, and this was in a state like Rajasthan, which is infamous for the Ghungat culture, for a certain degree of being conservative, patriarchal, etc. And I realized as a journalist who was on the ground and who was expected and who should ideally speak to all stakeholders so that there is a balanced perspective, it was very difficult to get the women voters to speak in the same way as men and to have a proportionate representation, as it were, because women were either reluctant or they were not allowed to speak. They didn't have the agency, or they thought they didn't have enough of an opinion, or an opinion that should matter. So all these things put together, but I would say it wasn't really, I wouldn't say I noticed the first winds of change in 2014. I would say I noticed a certain change which hit me in a more direct way in 2017 and 2018, because again, something I mentioned in the book, there were important elections in both these years. 2017 was the big Uttar Pradesh election where BJP stormed to power. End of 2017 was the election in Gujarat. In 2018, early 2018, there was an election in Tripura, which again, it's a very small state. Not many people talk about it, but was a landmark election because it ousted left rule of over 3 decades. And then the BJP, which had no base in the state, came to power. And then there were, of course, the state elections that happened in the winter of every 5 years, which was Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, etc. So in all these elections, because I had the flexibility then as a journalist for the outlet that I was working for, that I thought I should go to colleges to speak to young voters, to speak to first time perhaps voters or even second time voters and see what their aspirations were, because youth was emerging as a big category in itself. And I went to a lot of colleges in all these states, not just in urban areas, but in rural areas, and semi-rural areas, and semi-urban areas. And so I tried to cover all kinds of demographics. And I was surprised to see the kind of participation I saw from students who were women. So women, the female students, were far more articulate, were far more clear in their minds, were far more aware of what was happening, and were far more pragmatic and rational in terms of what they thought they expect from the party they choose or they would like to vote for than their male counterparts. And that's where I thought I realized something was changing. And I realized that this was going to be a big thing going forward. And sure enough, in 2019, we saw how, the voter turnout gap was completely closed. And that really is when the woman voter became a big story.
Ruhi, all these years you have been on the field talking with women and men voters. So, how do you think the political preferences and the voting choices of women are different from their male counterparts?
Right. This is a little bit of a complex question. So I'll answer it, in a bit of a layered fashion. So to begin with, yes, women, again, something I've written in the book, are far more pragmatic, rational, and more concerned about their day-to-day affairs. And there is a reason for that. It's because women have been deprived of so much for so long. They've been kept on the margins and they've been on the peripheries. And they've never really been a targeted segment. So there are basics that have been denied to them, which is why they are more concerned about basics today, right? And about what matters to them in their everyday lives, what helps them in their everyday lives than men. Men have the luxury of not being so rational. Men have the privilege of not being so pragmatic, and they can often talk about more esoteric issues like nationalism, like religion, faith, etc. So in that sense, yes, women and men are different, but at the end of the day, a voter is a voter. And voters have different motivations based on various other identities and various other factors. So I will qualify this by saying that a Kashmiri woman will have more in common with a Kashmiri man than she might with a woman from Chennai, right? Or a woman from Assam might have more in common with a woman from a man from Assam than she might with a woman from Goa. So I think these various identities, or say a 20-year-old girl may have more in common with a 20-year-old man as compared to an 80-year-old. So I think these kind of differences do exist, and I will qualify this by saying that it's not as if all women voters think alike and all male voters think alike, and there is like men are from Mars and women are from Venus kind of situation. It's not that. However, yes, on an average, as a larger, broader trend, women do vote in a certain way and men vote in a certain way, and which is why, see, there is, if men and women all thought similarly and voted similarly, there was no reason for political parties to start targeting women separately, right? Or to cater to women separately, or to speak in a different language, or have different schemes targeted at them. That's because they understand, they've sort of understood that women voters are looking at elections and votes slightly differently than men, and which is why there are tailored schemes for women as compared to, and tailored outreach programs for women as compared to that for men. So there is a certain marked difference, yes.
Now, I want to further talk about the schemes that are targeted towards women. But before that, I want to take your elaboration on one point that you wrote. You write that what makes the women electorate in India remarkable is that it is far from homogeneous, yet it commands a collective bargaining power. Yes, you have said how it is heterogeneous still now. So, what is this collective bargaining power that we are talking about?
So I always say this. Women also grapple with various identities, right? There is religion, there is faith, there's caste, there's ethnicity, there's region, there is demography, there is class, there is everything, right? So it's not as if women are all just thinking as women, but what makes women one unit in a certain way is that in every identity they have remained second to men, right? So a Hindu Brahmin woman is also second to a Hindu Brahmin man. A Muslim woman is second to a Muslim man. A Dalit woman is second. So in every other identity, women have remained second to men. And that is one glue, one binding factor, which makes women a slightly more common homogeneous block as compared to men. It's not a homogeneous block on its own, but I'm just talking in relative terms, that there is one common factor. Why is it that, for instance, a cash transfer works as well for women in Maharashtra as it does for women in Assam, which are two different parts of the country? Or why did the toilet scheme, for instance, work so well for rural women in various parts of the countries with different kinds of backgrounds? So it's because these women have been deprived of the same things. All right. And that's what makes them one slightly more homogeneous block as compared to men. Now, why is it that we talk of youth as one block, right? It's not as if all young people are different, are all same. They're all different, but then there are certain things that they want in common. Similarly, for farmers, for instance. So there are blocks that we create when we talk of voters because there are more common factors than there are dissimilarities. And I think that's also the case with women voters.
That's very interesting. I think a lot of your book essentially reflects about one egg and hen question, which is did women participation in India increase because the political parties started counting them as stakeholders? Or did their growing participation prompted and forced the political parties to do something for the women electorate in return?
So it is a chicken and egg question. There is no way to answer what came first. And I think it's not fair to also try and answer really what came first, because I think these are two sort of things that were happening simultaneously, right? And they overlap and they complement each other and they sort of they meet at some point. So I think both things were happening. The combination of factors led to women coming out more actively to vote, and a combination of factors led to politicians drawing more women out to vote, right? So I think all of these things came together. I think it's very difficult to sort of identify what came first. I would say it's a combination of these two, which is why we are where we are, where women are now in, in Bihar. They outnumbered men, not just in term percentage terms, but in absolute terms as well, in the Bihar election. So I think now we've reached that point because of these two connecting, complementing factors that have been at play for the last few decades.
Can you give us some anecdote based on your travels, how you come across this question?
This particular question about
Yeah.
what
Yes,
happened
yes, yes,
first.
yes.
So, I don't, as I say, this is not something one can identify. I can tell you that I have seen the power of the woman vote grow, a woman voter become more confident, more assertive, and more clear about what she wants. And similarly, I have seen politicians increasingly talk about women voters, right? So I have seen both things happening simultaneously. And I'll come back to the earlier point that I was making, because when we cover politics, we look at both the voter as well as what the politicians and political parties and policymakers are thinking and doing. And I think I've seen a sort of almost a parallel graph there, right? So women voters have on the ground started talking more. They're clear about what they want, what they don't want, why they want to, punish a certain political party or reward a certain political party. And they're more invested in the voting process now because they know it's not just a box to be ticked. They know this is an instrument of assertion, and this is a right which they must exercise, and which is why they are. See, the number of women vote, we also have to give credit to women for coming out to vote more, right? There is a lot of conversation that happens around how it's because, it's a push from the election commission or from NGOs, but that can only happen when it comes to registering more voters. And I think in my book I've given enough data to show the electors, which is the percentage of people registered to vote, has not changed much over the last few decades. It has remained the same. So it's not as if women registered to vote have suddenly gone up. It's women actually turning out to vote that has gone up. And that is purely a voluntary exercise, right? That is an exercise where you know that you should go out to vote. You feel invested in voting, and which is why you're going out to vote. So that is what we have seen on the ground as well when you ask for anecdotes. And we've seen women saying that, yeah, yes, I will go and vote, and I will vote for so and so, and I like this particular aspect. On the other hand, because we've been tracking political parties and the policy environment, and I've covered welfare policy also very closely, you see the kind of emphasis on women that has been increasing. So 20 years ago, when you interviewed a politician, they wouldn't really talk about the woman voter. And today they can't stop talking about the woman voter and how they're trying to pursue the woman voter, right? Similarly, in the policy environment, we see how emphasis has gradually been increasing from 33% that Narega mandated for women, to how rural housing said that the house has to be either in the name of the woman or joint name of woman and the husband. So we've seen things how policy environment has also been evolving to keep the woman at the center stage. So both these things have happened simultaneously.
Ruhi, one more question I want to further explore is that what has changed is not just women asserting their political preferences, but also their ability and strategies to fix accountability. They are not blindly believing in the promises made by the politicians or the declarations made by the politicians, but they are also punishing the politicians if there is gaps in the delivery. So could you elaborate on that?
Yes, so I think people try to make it sound very easy that, oh, they've bribed the woman voter and you've given her 2,500 rupees, so that's why she's voting for you. But it's a very myopic and frankly a bit of an insulting view to take of the woman voter, because that's not how she is voting. Um, I always give this example. What happened in Bihar in the last assembly elections? Why is it that Nitish Kumar, who promised 10,000, came back with such a landslide victory, while Tejasvi Yadav, who promised 30,000 to women, got such low numbers? Yeah, right. So if it was purely about bribing and purely about the kind of money you are offered, Tejasvi Yadav should have won that election. He offered thrice the amount of money that Nitish Kumar did, but it's because women voters trusted Nitish Kumar, and he has delivered to them in the past, right? So he has a track record of delivering to women voters, and that is why they voted for Nitish Kumar, because they wanted to reward him for his past. Not, it's a misconception to think they voted for Nitish Kumar because of these 10,000 rupees. No, they voted for Nitish Kumar because they've seen him for the last 20 years delivering what he's promised to women, right? Even if we agree or disagree with his policies. For instance, prohibition. I may not agree with it. I'm not a fan of banning anything, but women on the ground asked for it and they got it. So they have faith in Nitish Kumar and they've rewarded his delivery. So I think it's a bit of a misconception to believe that women are blindly just following wherever the money is taking them or wherever freebies are taking them. It's because they reward what's happening to them, and they also punish where they feel they've not got their due or they've not got what they absolutely should have got. So I think it works both ways, and increasingly we are seeing women emphatically express their displeasure or their happiness through their vote.
No, because we have started talking about Nitish Kumar, you have actually dedicated one full chapter about women's favorite politician, right? So tell us about it. How does one can become a woman's favorite politician? And you have actually focused on three characters at large: Shivraj Singh Chauhan, Nitish Kumar, Mamta Banerjee. So tell us this story.
So I have actually tried to focus on these contemporary politicians. I have, of course, said that NTR and MGR in the South were pioneers of this sort of a trend, and they were visionaries in their own way. And Jayalalitha, of course, followed. But in among the contemporary politicians, yes, I focused on Narendra Modi and the three politicians that you mentioned. And I mean, when we go on the ground, you hear of all politicians, right? But the kind of affection, reverence you hear for these politicians among women voters is something else. And I think all these politicians have done something unique, which is what has made them favorites for women voters, among women voters. Now, as I said, NGR, MTR, and Jayalalitha, I'll sort of keep out of the picture because they are visionaries in this sense. So they are a different league altogether. But Nitish Kumar, for instance, when he came to power in 2005 for his first full term, in 2006 he launched the Bicycle Mahila Yojana, right? Which if you look at it, he wasn't targeting a voter. The cycles of school-going girls, they were not voting, right? They were not of age. They were not eligible to vote. What he was doing through that particular scheme was genuinely trying to address a gap in society, that women didn't have access to education, safe transport, which he felt in rural areas was a big gap, and he was trying to address that in a genuine fashion. And through that, he created two generations of women voters. One was, of course, the mothers of these girls who felt that Nitish Kumar was doing something for their daughters, and the other was the woman, the girl, child who was in school and who grew up to become a fan of Nitish Kumar, right? So it was a very visionary thinking in a state like Bihar, which is steeped in patriarchy. Caste has been such a big thing. So gender was never talked about as an important aspect of emphasis. He also had reservation for girls, for women in government jobs. He 50% reservation in panchayat. He was the first politician to bring that. So he did all these emancipating measures which women saw as empowering techniques, right? They were very brazen signs of empowerment. And that is what endeared him to the woman voter, who stuck by him through his flip flops, through his going to NDA, going to the UPA, all of that, right? So Nitish Kumar had that one particular thing. Shivraj Singh Chauhan, a very different kind of politician from the other BJP politicians, right? Not a very polarizing figure, very amiable, very congenial. He again, when he became chief minister, he again understood, and he speaks from personal experience, because he in an interview for the book, he told me that he had seen discrimination in his own house, and it's a rare candid admission from a politician, right? He said, I saw how my sister was treated differently from me. So he drew from personal experience to understand why there was so much female feticide, infanticide, etc. in Madhya Pradesh, and why, as chief minister, he should try and address that. And which is when he came up with Ladli Lakshmi, where basically the idea was to not to convey the message that your daughter is not a curse, she's more of a boon, she's a blessing, so don't look at her as a bane. And he spoke to the woman voter directly, which is why he became Mamaji for them, right? Because he became like a family elder who was taking care of women in the family, right? So there was a relationship he established. Mamata Banerjee, of course, is Didi for everybody, but she is particularly admired by women because she is, at the end of the day, a woman politician who shows a lot of grit. And the way she dresses, the way she speaks, she's very relatable. Plus, her schemes, again, have been very, very smartly designed for women. So, it's not just blind cash transfers. She gives cash transfers. For instance, Lakshmi Bhandar has certain qualifications, right? That you have to pass class 12 or whatever the specific qualifications are to get that money. So that's encouraging women to study and encouraging families to make sure women study. Then she's had, these schemes where because women may find it difficult to go to government offices and complain, etc., etc. So she's had schemes where there are, many government offices set up which make it more accessible for women. So there are many things that these politicians have done which have been ahead of their other contemporaries, and that's what has made them enduring to women. And Narendra Modi, of course, I think. I may disagree with his politics and his party's politics fully, but you have to give credit where due. He brought the conversation about women voters to the national center stage. Nobody was talking about women nationally in on the scale that they did after Narendra Modi came. He began his term by talking about toilets for women in rural areas. What a shame that that didn't exist till then. He began by talking about Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. He began by talking about Ujjwala, that women don't have access to clean cooking fuel. So he began talking about women on a pan-India level, and that's something that stayed with women voters of India. So there is, you essentially need to be able to speak their language, connect with them, and think ahead of what the others are thinking of.
That was a quite an interesting perspective. One more question I want to ask is there certain preference women voters give for female politicians over the male politicians at the legislative levels?
So I don't think so far there has been any anecdotal or statistical evidence to show that. I think if women were looking only at women, then Narendra Modi, Nitish Kumar, Shivraj Singh Chauhan, MGR, NTR would not have been so popular. And I don't believe that Jayalalitha and Mamta Banerjee are popular only because they are women. I think they're popular because they connect with women and they're able to address gaps in women's lives. So I think it's a question of connection, of being able to uplift and empower them on an everyday basis more than gender. Otherwise, someone like Smriti Irani or someone like, Mayawati should have been hugely popular among women, but they have different constituencies, but not women as co-constituencies, right? So it's not about gender so far. That has not happened. But I will say something that going forward, the question of why there are not more women in politics, in policy making, will be a question that women voters will eventually ask once they have got their basics and they've got their Bijli Sarak Pani kind of basics have been ticked off. The next question they will ask is about empowerment, right? And this question will come up. So then the gender might start mattering a little bit. And also I feel there is something to be said about the empathy perhaps a woman can bring to policy making when you look at making policies for women, or when you look at making schemes or outreach programs for women, which you know there is a different vantage point that comes in, right? Right now, what happens is largely through a male perspective, but there is a certain benefit that having more women can bring. A more balanced perspective can perhaps happen. So it is important, but so far, is there a direct correlation between the kind of politician a woman voter likes and the gender of that politician? No.
Ruhi, the next aspect I want to focus on is the question of caste. How does the caste play a role in women voting preferences, and to what extent that it influences their preferences?
So it's again a very, very layered and complex issue. Caste and religion both are very, very difficult issues to talk about, and they can't be spoken of in just a few words. But I do say one thing always when I try to talk about this issue in the context of women voters. One is that women don't live in silos, right? They also live in society, and caste and religion are so deeply ingrained in our society that it's very difficult to segregate gender from caste, and all of us are steeped into this, whether or not we like it, in direct conscious ways or in indirect subconscious ways. So it's not as if women are totally immune to the issues of caste and religion. No, not at all. But I will say that women are showing greater propensity than men to keep these issues a little at bay and vote more on the basis of their gender. Because, again, as I said, what has really kept them on the margins largely is their gender. But I will again qualify, as I said, it's a bit of a complex issue by saying, look, it also depends on what's your bigger vulnerability, right? So for a Hindu woman, her big vulnerability is her gender, right? Hindu upper caste woman, right? Her big vulnerability is her gender. So she can afford to set aside her caste and religion and look at gender as the bigger identity that she needs to keep in mind while voting. But I am not sure a Dalit woman can do that, because for her, she has two vulnerabilities: her caste and her gender. So for her, that clashes, right? she has to then look at very strategically as to which is the bigger vulnerability at which point, which political party is not inimical to either of the two interests, right? For a Muslim woman, for instance, again, her religion and her gender are two big vulnerabilities. It's a double whammy for her. Now, as much as the BJP might want us to believe, Muslim women don't vote for BJP because the party's politics is solely based on Hindutva and a majoritarian aspect, right? So the a Muslim woman realizes that even if, and I qualified by saying that even if she realizes that yes, the BJP is giving schemes which are helping her as a woman, she as a Muslim cannot afford to vote for the BJP because of the kind of othering the BJP does. So there, her being a Muslim becomes a bigger disadvantage for her. So she cannot easily afford to keep her religion aside. She has to keep in mind her religion when she goes to vote and make sure she doesn't vote for a party that goes against the interests of her communities. So it's of a community. So it's a very complex question. It plays out in various complex ways, but yeah, it's essentially it's a matrix like the way I've tried to answer.
No, again, going back to the empowerment question about why there are not many women legislators, right? You actually quote something what a voter have told you in Tamil Nadu that there are no many women politicians because women don't know how to lie. So, could you elaborate a bit about why there is a very much gap in terms of women legislators being active in politics?
No, I think you as a man should answer that question because politics has been a male-dominated sphere. So no, but on a serious note, I think it's because our society is so steeped in patriarchy, and politics has always been seen as a male domain, as a dirty domain which women shouldn't really enter. And there have been so many barriers to entry for women, and political parties are to blame for that, right? Because nobody has created a conducive enough environment or encouraged women enough, except barring a few parties, to come in, sort of enter politics at higher echelons. So there are various reasons, largely given our societal setup and our mindset. And as I said, the next question women will ask will be this, and there are political parties who are smart enough to understand that. I mean, to understand that once women have got their ghar and their ujwala and their toilets and their cash transfers and even perhaps employment, they will start asking about empowerment. And I suspect the BJP under Narendra Modi has readied itself for this by quickly, getting the Women's Reservation Act, implemented, and it's going to implement it as in passed, the bill passed. And, if the next time women ask that question, the party is going to stand up and say, look, we did this. This was lying in the, in hanging in balance for so long, and Congress didn't do it, and, the third front governments didn't do it. Nobody did it, but we have done it. So we thought of this earlier. So clearly, the BJP is a smart party, and it's already thought of the fact that this question will come next. And I suspect this question will be raised increasingly, especially by the younger generations.
No, I think we have to wait and see the amount of the kind of effect women reservation bill might have. Now, moving on to the next important aspect in your book is about the welfareism, right? And we have touched upon it. Now, there is a competition among political parties when it comes to providing the welfare schemes for the women, and women were very largely perceived to be the at the receiving end of the welfare schemes, and they will be wooed easily by the political parties. And you have answer this question through various layers. So let's start with the basic question. So do women merely receive the welfare goods and vote for the political parties?
I when I was writing the book, I actually I think it's the longest chapter in my book, if I'm not wrong. And when I was writing the book, I didn't think this would be the most talked about chapter. I thought, I wrote the chapter on caste and faith, the last, because that was a more complex chapter. It's very layered. But it's only after I wrote the book and after the book, people started talking about the book, and I went for these conversations like I'm with you in conversation. I realized that welfareism actually is the most talked about chapter, and it's the most layered concept because people have a very different view of welfareism and the woman voter, right? They think that women voters look at themselves as abla labhartis, as recipients of freebies, and they're very happy to get something free. Ki kuch humko free mein mil gaya, so we're going to sit at home and enjoy this freebie. But that's not how the woman voter is thinking. And if political parties are thinking like that, then they're going to be in for a rude shock at some point or the other. What women voters are looking at when they look at what you call freebies, I like to look at them as welfare initiatives, is the kind of tangible benefit that welfare initiative is bringing to her life. It could be something small, it could be something big. But if it's making a difference to her life in a certain way, which she can perceive and which she can feel, then she is happy to receive that benefit. And then she is happy to vote for you to reward you for that benefit. Now, I already gave that example about Tejasvi and Nitish Kumar, right? Like the 10,000 versus 30,000. If it was just purely about dying for freebies, then why would you not vote for the person who's promising 30,000? Um, let's talk about cash transfers first. Why are cash transfers popular among women? It's easy to say that because they're getting free money, but try to think of what women voters in rural areas, for instance, are doing with that 2,500 or 5,000 or whatever, 2,000, 1,500, whatever they're getting. Are they sitting at home and using this to, just make merriment? Even if they do, there's nothing wrong in it, by the way. But I'm saying, are they doing it? No. They use it either for better nutrition for the household, for education for their children, or in most cases, I cannot tell you the countless examples of women voters who are using this money as seed capital to start something small, whether it's a tailoring boutique in their house, whether it's a small beauty salon in their village, whether it's a vegetable vending kiosk, whether it's a chai nashta stall, chola kulcha stall, whatever, samosa stall. They are using this money to start something very small, which can give them a more sustainable form of livelihood and which can give them a better life. So women are using cash transfers to better their lives. They are not using it as a freebie, which they're getting free of cost and sitting happily at home with. Why are toilet schemes popular? Because women in rural areas didn't have toilets. They had to go to the fields to relieve themselves. It was a question of safety. It was a question of dignity. What toilets in their homes have given them are these two things. So they become important for women voters, right? Why is it that is popular? Is it because they were getting a subsidized free gas connection and a subsidized cylinder? No, it's because they were the ones who had to walk for miles to arrange for alternative sources of fuel, walk back with all those logs of wood, cook in the kitchen with that kind of smoke and fume, and the children are also inhaling those fumes. Their lives have improved with Ujjwala, which is why they appreciate Ujjwala. Why is it? It's a very simple example. People make fun of Jayalalitha and the mixer grinder culture, right? I mean, that's synonymous with freebies ki Jayalalitha तो मिक्सी भी दे देती थी और चुनाव जीत जाती थी. But why is it that women voters appreciated a mixer grinder? um, it's because they were spending time in the kitchen, and for them, especially the kind of cuisine they were perhaps making, there was a lot of grinding work that had to be done, and they were spending hours of time and a lot of effort just grinding away. The mixer grinder gave them a certain freedom. It improved their lives in whatever small way you might look at it as, right, in a very substantive manner. Can a politician today win an election on a mixer grinder? No. If Jayalalitha had been around today, would she have still offered mixer grinders? No, because it has outlived its utility, because women have now got that there, right? So it's now they moved on to say, I think the big thing in Tamil Nadu is free bus rides, right? Because now they're looking for something better, bigger. They can go out to study, they can go out to work. So the demands and needs of the women voter obviously evolve. However, what she appreciates is it's something very tangible, because it brings something tangible to her life. It makes an improvement in her head, in her life. You may not see it, I may not see it, because we also come from a certain position of privilege. So we may not be able to see why she's attracted to these what we call freebies, but because it's improving her life, there is a substantive benefit of these freebies, and which is why women voters are attracted to these kind of schemes.
So the immediate next question is: are women only interested in the welfare schemes that are only that helps them exclusively, and do they not care about the infrastructure at large?
No, so I think it's again a bit of a misconception. Infrastructure is not the sole domain of men. Women are increasingly looking at infrastructure as an important aspect of their lives and of their voting decisions. Women are talking of highways, of roads, of safety in many parts of the country, and all of this together forms a certain infrastructure, ecosystem. It's because if the infrastructure is better, they can go out to study, they can go out to work. Their daughters and sons can go out to study and work. So I think it's a misconception that welfareism is the only thing that matters to women. It depends a lot. Like safety, for instance, is not a uniform concern. I don't think safety is as much of a concern for a woman in rural Assam as it is for a woman in Delhi or a woman in Uttar Pradesh, right? So obviously these things matter to women in different degrees, depending on where you're from and what your background is. But women are looking at all these things combined as a bouquet when they look at their voting decisions.
And you also elaborate the fact that you already spoken a little bit about it. If you could elaborate more on it, that these welfareism also has a limitation. It does not always work if we don't have a better imagination about it. So, could you show it with an example?
Yes. So, for instance, as I said, can a mixer grinder promise work today? I mean, no politician is making that promise, right? Because they would just sound silly. Women have moved beyond that. Just similarly, cash transfers will also have its limitations because women are going to ask about what next. Now you're giving us 2,500. For how long should we be happy with this 2,500? What are you going to give us next? What is the bigger game plan? So, employment, rozgar, is a very, very big demand, and it should be evident to politicians given how much women are gravitating towards starting some small businesses using the cash transfers. So the easier ways to enable livelihood for them, have targeted livelihood schemes for them, and it's a more sustainable and long term way. So obviously, women's demands will evolve with time. Not everything is stagnant, and it's going to be a steep curve. I'll tell you why, because the base was so low for women that and they were kept deprived for so long that there'll be a certain sharp rise in their demands and in the evolution of their demands. So they'll move from one step to another very quickly now. As we go forward, we're going to see that.
In your through your field works for during the elections, what are the extremes in the demands that you have seen for the women? So from the most basic to the most advanced, what are the extremes that you have seen?
Right. So basic. I mean, basic, really, as I said, even not having a toilet in your house. So I'll tell you, I was in Telangana ahead of the Lok Sabha elections, and I was traveling from Hyderabad to Warangal, and on the way, I met a group of women, and they were Sikh women, right? It was a small community. It was very surprising to see, but they said they'd been settled there for over 50 years, and they said, because we are not locals and we are nobodies in that sense. We don't they lived in very pitiable, very, very deficient conditions. They said we have no toilets, we have no access to anything. And for them the most basic demand was that at least come and talk to us, listen to us. Men are able to still get something for themselves. We don't have work, we don't have money, we don't have toilets, we live in a kacha house. We share a house with 15 other men. We don't feel great about it. So these are very, very basic concerns, which unfortunately, and I think what strikes me the most is the whole toilet bit. That how can that be that how can we be so deprived? In a country where dignity and safety for women can be compromised to such an extent. So that's the most basic demand, and I think advanced is. I'm not sure it's fair to look at these as advanced as advanced questions, but questions of empowerment, right? That why are there such few politicians who are women? Why is it that we're not seeing more politicians? And there are some women who started asking that question. And even in rural India, I'm not just talking about a certain class in urban India which is asking that question. There are women in rural India also that are who are asking these questions, that why are there not more women? Why is it that we are only seeing so many men? Why are there no women who come to campaign? It's easier for us to talk to women sometimes, but why is it that women don't come? So I'm not sure it's fair to look at this as an advanced demand, but it is a more evolved demand. Let me put it that way.
No, two aspects I want to take is health and education, right? I think those are two concerns for the women voters, certainly. So, how do they look at the health? Now, I'm asking this question because during the COVID, right, we have seen migration crisis, and women of the household is something who are very much deeply affected. So, have you seen some of observations during your journeys about the COVID? Because the reason I'm asking is we have recently the book by Jyoti Yadav about the COVID crisis. So, how are the women voters responding to the COVID crisis they have lived through, and what has changed in them because of the COVID? Any reflections
You
on
know,
that?
I think, to be fair, COVID, Jyoti is an old colleague of mine, but I'm yet to read her book. But I think COVID impacted everybody equally, and I think especially migrant workers, it impacted all migrant workers equally. I don't think it was a question of gender, and I don't think women are also looking at it as a gendered thing, right? Health, COVID are issues that men were also asking about and were concerned about to a very significant extent. Um, so I honestly don't think COVID had such an impact on a gendered basis, but health as a concern for women, yes, it is a concern. But I wouldn't say it somehow, for some reason, it doesn't rank. as the top concern. Uh, Perhaps because we have primary health centers in various places. I'm not sure why, but hospitals, the lack of hospitals or healthcare is not something that women are actively talking about to such a significant extent. Of course, they're talking about it, but we are talking in terms of in comparison to other issues, right? So I don't think health is something that women are talking about just yet, but they should and they will. I feel eventually once they've so and there are indirect ways in which health is spoken about, right? They may not be able to link it directly. For instance, again coming back to Ujjwala, this was impacting their health, right? And which is why they appreciate Ujjwala. So they look at health in a more not in a linear way necessarily that there is a hospital or there is XYZ or even toilets, right? It's because if they were sort of using the fields, which is not a very healthy thing to do. So clearly they look at health in a slightly more fuzzy manner than we perhaps think. And they look at hospitals, etc., when it comes to their children, that they should have better health care. But it's not the most, I wouldn't say it's the most active demand I have heard among women voters on an average across the country. Of course, there are parts of the country where it's more talked about, and there are parts of the country where it's less talked about. But I wouldn't say it's the even in COVID, a lot of conversations that women voters had were about हमको सरकार से क्या मिला. It wasn't the question of health. It was about ration. हमको इन्होंने राशन दिया, इन्होंने पैसे दिए, इनसे हमको मदद मिली है कोविड के टाइम पे. Because health, I think, when COVID happened, all of us were taken aback. So it was the same for all genders. It was new to everybody. It was such a leveler at the end of the day, from a very well off person who couldn't get an oxygen cylinder to a poor person who couldn't get an oxygen cylinder. It was a great leveler. So I think women also realized that COVID has impacted everyone equally, and I don't think there was a gendered view of COVID as such. Education, so education depends on your generation, right? Younger women are very actively talking about education. They're talking about scholarships. They're talking about enabling conditions for education. Safety is a key aspect of that, right? They want a safe environment. They want law and order so that they can go out to study. Right, their parents wouldn't stop them from higher studies because it's unsafe outside. That's the reason why Bihar, coming back to Nitish Kumar and cycles for school-going girls, right? There's a reason why that became so popular because education was a demand. Um, Bus rides, now why are free bus rides, free public transport rides so popular? It's because for a woman that's an enabling measure. She doesn't have to worry about that aspect when it comes to working or when it comes to taking up a job, so or going to study, for instance, right? So because parents often, in unfortunately in Indian families, if you have to allocate budgets for this education of your children, they would tend to allocate the budget for the son instead of the daughter if they had to choose. But if her going to school and coming back from school is free, that's one hassle that she's got, sort of got rid of. So, or going to college for that matter, whatever. So I think education is a very important conversation which is happening especially among younger girls, school college going girls, first time voters who emphasize on various aspects: scholarships, safer environment, better infrastructure, free public transport, and among older women when it comes to their daughters and their sons. So they talk of education in a more family oriented way, that government should enable education for our children, they should give scholarships, etc.
Ruhi Tewari, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure, absolutely. Thank you so much.